Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Jamie Pittock. I'm a professor at the Fenner School of Environment and Society, and I had the pleasure of leading the Transforming Irrigation in Southern Africa project since 2013. Today's seminar is about reporting the findings from our 10 years of research funded by the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, and also supported by the Crawford Fund that has funded some critical research travel for our associated PhD students. Let me start this seminar by acknowledging the traditional owners on the lands in which we meet, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples, and acknowledge their elders past and present. This seminar is being held at the Australian National University. I will now provide a brief introduction into the Transforming Irrigation in Southern Africa project, or TISA, and my colleagues will then follow and present some of the findings. So, TISA has recently won the European Foundation for Management and Development Excellence in Practice Gold Award. And this is a great tribute to our many 7, in fact, research organisation partners and ACR as our primary funder. Over these 10 years, we've been looking at this question about how can small-scale irrigation improve prosperity and food security. So across Africa, only 4% of land is irrigated compared to 18% worldwide. Irrigation schemes are trapped in a rebuild, fail and rebuild cycle. And significant new investment in irrigated agricultural infrastructure is planned by most African nations and many donors. So how do we prevent past failures? So in this presentation, we'll report on TISA's key findings and hopefully indicate why we won the award. The Transforming Irrigation in Southern Africa project began in 2013 with modest funding and piloting our work, our interventions in 6 irrigation schemes spread across Tanzania, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe. After demonstrating some proof of concept, in 2017 we were funded to scale the innovations out to other irrigation schemes and up in terms of bigger levels of governance, and we're currently finalising this final year of research. So currently we're engaged in 42 irrigation schemes across 5 provinces or districts in the 3 countries, and are engaging with something like 16,000 farming families. We intervened with two key approaches. One is providing a minority of farmers with soil moisture monitoring tools to enable them to learn and make decisions about how they can better utilise limited land and water resources. The first of these tools is the chameleon sensor, developed by Dr. Richard Sturzaker from CSIRO. The web link here at via.farm provides a lot more information about these tools. So these tools have 4 sensors that are buried at different depths in the soil. The sensors can be plugged into this reader, and the reader lights up in colours indicating the extent of the moisture available at those different depths of the crop roots. So the reader typically lights up as red, meaning the soil's dry, green that the soil's moist, and blue that the soil is saturated. The second intervention that we've made is employing a full stop wetting front detector, also invented by Dr. Richard Sturzaker. 2 of these are buried at different depths in the soil root zone, as depicted here. As water infiltrates through the soil, it collects in the funnel. That releases a magnetic latch, and an indicator pops up, tells the farmer there's water down here. The farmers can then extract a bit of this solute and test it with a basic EC meter for salinity and a nitrate test strip to get some idea of the fertilizers available in the soil. These tools the farmers take to with alacrity. Here's one farmer explaining how the chameleon opened her eyes, and another farmer showing how to analyze the solute for nitrates and salinity. This is really powerful knowledge. The farmers directly receive data that they can use to learn and change their management practices. The farmers meet and discuss some of the implications and develop a number of lessons from their first-hand experience. And what we've seen, as my colleagues will report, is that they then dramatically change their farming practices. The second intervention that we have made is a social process that goes by the awful jargon name of Agricultural Innovation Platform. This is essentially inviting the farmers to develop a 5-year vision for their community, then identifying the barriers and opportunities for them to achieve that 5-year vision, moving on to prioritise the interventions that they can directly influence, particularly by engaging with other actors, such as in the agricultural value chain, to agree on win-win solutions, such as bulk buying farm inputs at cheaper prices, or meeting with the crop buyers to determine what timing and quality of produce will bring a better price. So this really develops the problem-solving capacities of the individuals and the farming communities, and the kinds of decisions and actions that they take, we think will be maintained after the project ends, because they generate mutual benefits for all of the stakeholders in the farming system. We undertook a lot of data collection across these 10 years, and I won't go through all of this in detail, but this data underpins the results that my colleagues will report to you next. They include a number of household surveys tracking change over time. Farmers have taken field books onto their fields to record key inputs and outputs, which then helps them to compute gross margins for their crops and make decisions about more profitable farming. We've also undertaken things like collaborative mapping, in-depth interviews and focus group, and all of this data informs the findings that you will hear now. Our research has resulted in extensive publications. In particular, I draw your attention to these 2 special issues of the International Journal of Water Resources Development that really summarise some of the actions we've undertaken and the key research findings. So thank you for listening to this seminar. I hope you find it rewarding, and I will now pass on to my colleagues to explain our findings.
Right. Good afternoon to everyone, and let me thank Anu for hosting us today for these presentations. Well, I'll briefly share what were the lessons, what were the impact of this project in Mozambique. As Henning said, my name is Mario Shinundu from Mozambique. Well, I will take you through this presentation by few aspects about the sites, the major challenges that were affecting these sites before TISA intervention, the major change, and I'll finalize my presentation by some concluding remarks. Actually, TISA project in Mozambique has been implemented in 11 sites. Let me also highlight here that on phase 1, Basically, one site in Mozambique has been monitored. The other one has been affected by floods, so we could not keep up with it. But later on, we involved additional 10 sites. So today, 10 sites, sorry. So today I'll report about the findings of the 25th of September irrigation scheme, September in Portuguese, which lies in a wet semi-arid climate, the rainfall reaching about 900 millimeters. The major crops there is green maize and also tomatoes and cabbage. The focus of this presentation, of course, will be on green maize. Well, what was there before? Basically, issues like low yields and of course affecting the household income. Also, the lack of good quality inputs as a result of inability of farmers to invest more into good inputs. The limited access to market also affected their ability to get more income. And the obsolete irrigation infrastructure is a consequence of all these aspects that we were facing. And of course, that would bring to all issues like members leaving the schemes, or even disruption or distrust among the association members. Well, the project has intervened, and basically, Jamie, I think, has given a clear introduction on what actually was done. What you see here in this graph basically is the change in terms of adoption on farm practice as a result of the project intervention. This is a cumulative line that shows up that about 75% of the farmers now adopted, or some have shown some changes in the practice by 2020. And let me highlight, here the year 2015 and also 2019. 2015 was soon after the project had started intervention. And also 2019 here, it was basically after we resumed the interventions with the second phase of teaser. But this time around, we had also some enthusiastic young farmers, stepping into the scheme, which also were eager to adopt these new practices. What was then found to be beneficial, what farmers actually realized to be a benefits from this intervention? You can see all sort of aspects that have been highlighted by the farmers, but especially saving of money with water and fuel, because they were getting less, because then they will use less fuel. The increased yield was one of the aspects that they perceive as a major benefit. Saving time also to other farming activities. This is also very important, because then we could see farmers now, engaging in off-farm activity that will bring more income to the households. This graph shows, it's just an example of the changes that we could monitor in terms of farmers that received tools and those compared to those that did not receive tools over time. So it means we monitor them from 2014 to 2021. What you see here in terms of intervention interval, there's basically an increase, meaning that more and more they had the ability to learn from these tools, and now they're irrigating less frequently, sort of say. But also one important aspect here is that you see the blue bars there and the red bars also moving quite close to each other, meaning that there was evidence of farmer to farmer learning. They were chatting, they were talking, they were exchanging experience. And as I mentioned, the increase in irrigation interval has also impact on the reduction, let's say, on the irrigation events. But most important of all, of course, is the yield. The yield brings money. Yield means, the product, the produce itself. So what you see in this graph first is how then the grain maize yield changed over time. You can quickly see that there was a jump, at least from about 5 tons per hectare to more than, or nearly 20 tons per hectare of grain maize. Even though there at the end, there's a tendency for dropping. And basically this was because of the impact of COVID. we are talking about green maize, which is a commodity that's mostly sold, in urban areas, all the issues with suspicious, of getting affected and so on, somehow affected, the level of production. But here also you see the magnitude of change compared the beginning, of project intervention to where we are at the moment, that the percentage of change was really high. And we see this as a result of combination of different, intervention, like new business plans developed by farmers, better seeds, gross margin workshops, and also tools. Let me also mention that this also has significant impact on increase in gross margins from 15 to about $2,000 per hectare, which is actually massive for the farmers. Well, talking about food security, which was also a key aspect that has been monitored, we could see that soon after the project or before the project intervention, about 16% of the household experienced some sort of food shortage. That was lowered to about 5% by end of 2019. But unfortunately, due to COVID, now when we went back and asked them, they could see that the majority somehow recognized that they were being somehow affected by COVID and they're experiencing food shortage. But I wanted to highlight that the reduction on this income, it's mostly now perceived by non-TISA farmer as being much more strong, meaning that they would be less prepared to face this new impacts of COVID compared to TISA aspect. The data are not bringing here, but of course we can share with you later. What were other project impact? We could see that now they were able to rehabilitate, and maintain their scheme. They are much more willingness to pay for fuel and water because now they see the results. Water allocation was one of the aspects that has been improved in the project, especially the tail end farmers now who could get better access to water, and of course attraction of youth into the scheme. Besides the issue of better access to inputs and seeds because of the AIP intervention and so on. So what are the concluding remarks? Basically, to say that TISA interventions improve farmer welfare and food security. That's a fact, is an evidence. And we could see also farmer-to-farmer lending as being also important to share knowledge. And of course, most important of all was the ability for them to increase, the yield. Not only of green maize, but we could see that the same pattern for other crops as well. And that resulted in increase in household income, especially when you looked on farm, but also there was also the off farm, activity because they could have more time. And that built up into the resilience, meaning that the farmers will be more equipped, in terms of resource to respond to extreme events. The sense of scheme ownership that we're bringing here is the fact that, among the activities that they will run, there was participatory mapping activity on their schemes. But now they knew that, okay, this particular plot belongs to me or has been registered on my name. And that also built up this sense of ownership. And with that also a better opportunity, for scheme maintenance and expansion. And this are the facts also that we observed. And to end my presentation, let me highlight also this potential use of the AIP and tools approach, by decision makers. Back home recently, I have to tell you that the government is engaged in purchasing tools, so that they can be used in the other schemes, meaning that they now recognize more the importance of this sort of interventions. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mario. And now I'd like to invite Dr. Rupert Kusula. He is from Adi University in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, and he will be talking about the experience in Tanzania.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. those who are here and those who are online, I presume. So I'll be presenting to you the same sort of story, but from Tanzania's perspective, basically what has been the transformative impact of the TISA interventions. So very briefly, Tanzania relies on agriculture very much because it's a sector that contributes 70% of the food supply, basically from smallholders, but also employs majority of our population. But it's important to note that out of the land area that has irrigation potential, only just about 2% is actually irrigated. So I'll not dwell into the interventions. We've heard that there were the tools and the innovation platforms. So just to note that for our two schemes, we have the tools that were implemented in Kiwere scheme, and of course the cultural innovation platforms that were implemented in both schemes. Now, in terms of the agricultural innovation platforms activities, a number of issues were transacted across the different meetings and interactions, and this mainly relates to access to quality inputs, issues relating to markets, issues related to agronomic practices, some poor scheme infrastructure, poor management of the schemes. These were the issues that were transacted over time, identified, of course, and transacted. And then some of the solutions that were pursued included trying to establish and foster market linkages, both for input and output markets, but also creating sort of enabling environments. Basically, two key activities. One was collaborative mapping that was done, but also connected to that were also processes that relate to the revision of the constitutions of these schemes to better manage these schemes, but also promotion of high-value crops, training of these farmers both at scheme and individual farmer level on the business, some of the business skills that they required. And so in all these solutions or activities did have an impact or contributed to some of the changes that we see. And basically, some of these changes, now here I'm talking of changes that have been contributed both by the tools and the IPs. And first relates to irrigation management practices, in which we see a drop in the frequency of irrigation from around 5. So from around every 2.7 days in 2014 to around 5 days. So basically, it's an increase, instead of irrigating every 2.7 days, they're now taking a bit longer to irrigate, but also a drop in the duration of each irrigation event. And similar to Mozambique, we also see, when you look at it cumulatively, we see an increase in the uptake of learning in terms of the changes that farmers have adopted. Then we also see some changes in farming activities, and this relates to reduced use of chemical fertilizer, of course, because of now less leaching, but also the learning from the better agronomic practices, but also farmers recognize also the importance of using manure. And this is what we see, an increase. But also there's some previously unfarmed plots that have been brought to irrigation, and over time also new crops have been introduced. Of course, we're talking of crops like pigeon peas, etc. And in terms of yields, of course, we see an increase in yields. This is for green maize, for example, in Kiwere, and this is for rice for Magozi scheme. So since 2014 all the way to around just before COVID, we see a gradual, a steady increase in yields per hectare. But of course, we know that there have been some disruptive impacts of COVID. That's why we see a drop here, of course, plus other few shocks. What has been the impact or the contribution of these changes to food and income, to food security and income? We see, of course, increased changes in terms of the number of sources of income, both farm and non-farm. But I wanted to at least draw your attention to what farmers report. So 2017, they report better household farm income compared to 4 years ago. And also just pre-COVID also, they also report better household farm income compared to 4 years ago. And this is the same case with household off-farm income. Of course, we see a change for post-COVID period, which is of course understandable given the disruptive effects that were brought. Of course, a few impacts, contribution, changes that we see also at the scheme level. We see increased information needs and information flows, of course. Farmers being more confident because of the scheme mapping that was conducted, but also because of the revised constitutions. So a more confident, enhanced confidence in the processes that underpin, their irrigation schemes. And there also increased, there is also increased reliability of water, of course, related to this reduced conflicts over water, of course, because of reduced irrigation frequency, but also the changes that have happened in terms of irrigation management. We also have evidence of increased willingness to participate in irrigation schemes, and of course, more importantly, farmers paying O&M fees. Just to close, yes, what we can conclude is that the tools and AIPs have contributed to some positive income outcomes for these two schemes, but it will be crucial that interventions continue to focus on institutional aspects. Of course, there's a lot of focus on the technical and infrastructural aspects, but of course, it will be important to sustain this focus on institutional aspects, and in particular, strengthening some of the operations and maintenance frameworks in these schemes, because we see increased, very nice pictures of increased harvest, but of course, there are challenges in terms of managing the infrastructure. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Lucas, staying well in time. Very well done. We will now turn to the third and final of the country papers, and that's from Zimbabwe, by Senior Scientific Officer Tabane Dube from the International Crops Research Institute for the Semi-Tropical Area in Bulawayo, Zimbabwe. Okay, Tabane.
Thank you, Eni. My name is Tabane Dube. I'll be presenting on the work we've done in Zimbabwe. My presentation will revolve around the Small-Scale Irrigation scheme, which is where we've been working since 2013. So this is the only scheme that we've covered since in the first and second phase of TISA. The scheme is one of the largest in the region. That's the Matabeleland South, measuring in total 440 hectares, and yes, over 800 farmers. But I'll concentrate our work on Landela block, which is 110 hectares. So the scheme has got four other blocks, which measure maybe between 80 and 100 hectares. So on average, each household has access to about 0.5 hectares. And the system is the flood irrigation. So most of the labor in the irrigation scheme is provided by women, as shown in this picture. And I would say it's quite intensive because they have to move the siphons from one point to another. Where did we start? We started off with the Agriculture Innovation Platform, where we took stock of what was happening in the scheme and trying to find the pathway through which we could improve the performance of the scheme. Yes, you'll see this picture here is what the farmers indicated was the situation around 2014. And this other picture here is what farmers envisioned to be their situation after about 5 years. In terms of yields, in 2013-14, this is consistent with what we got in the baseline. Farmers, for example, when you look at maize, they were getting about 1 ton per hectare, and they expected that after 5 years following certain interventions, they will go up to 10 tons. We are not yet there, but we are in the right direction. So after the innovation platform, we have identified a number of challenges, and also the introduction of the tools is one of the interventions that could address some of the challenges, particularly those which were related to water management. We observed changes which are more similar to what my colleagues have been presenting. So at the end of the first phase of the project, which was around 2017 there, with about 60% of the farmers that had changed their irrigation frequency. Of course, there were other changes that were also being measured, like the duration of irrigation event and the number of siphons, but that did not change much. Few farmers changed that, but what they changed significantly was the frequency of irrigation, which changed from around 7 days to 14 days. And some of the benefits that we found out from the farmers of these changes related to saving time. I'll just touch on saving time, because most of the labor that is provided in the irrigation schemes actually comes from the family. So this becomes important if they are now irrigating once in 14 days instead of every 7 days. And also the changes related to water benefits. There were no issues to do with energy saving because this is gravity fed, so no one is actually paying anything related to pumping the water. Then we have the second phase. We observed that, in fact, maybe before I go to the second phase, in the first phase, we distributed the tools to 20% of the farmers. But at the end of the first phase, we observed that 60% of the farmers had changed their irrigation practice. And we attributed that to farmer-to-farmer learning that was taking place within the scheme. And because of those lessons, we took them to the second phase, where the second phase, our job really was to take farmers from Small-Scale Irrigation Scheme to the other 16 or so irrigation schemes that we're working on in Matabeleland North. And as a result of that, the changes in the second phase over a period of 5 years were much faster than what we observed in the Small-Scale Irrigation Scheme, where at the end of the second phase, we observed that 90% of the farmers had indicated that they changed their irrigation frequency. I've not put the average, but it was differing by scheme, but more or less the same with what Small-Scale was doing. And also through the innovation platform in Small-Scale, we were able to link farmers to high value markets, and as a result, farmers introduced new high value crops like organic and so forth. So what has been the impact of the changes that came out of the interventions that we were pursuing in the project? All right, that's fine. I think I'll start with changes in water productivity. I wanted to link this to changes in yield. I think my slides are mixed up there. But let me go. Okay, the yield changes first. So at baseline, as I indicated first in the innovation platform vision picture, farmers had indicated that they were producing almost a ton of maize per hectare, and that is what we observed even from the baseline findings. But at the end of the first phase, that yield had gone up to about 3.5 tons, and at the end of the second phase, we're at 3.8 tons, which is still way below the 10 tons that they envisioned to have achieved, achieved in the 5 years. So what has this done to water productivity? So we see also when we measured the maize yield for water that was used, where we included the amount of water used, including the amount of irrigation, water, and also rainfall, we increased it by a factor of about 6 times from the baseline to the end of first phase. So this evidence is also published in the special issue, a paper that was led by Martin Moyo. Then we see also a dip here in water productivity, but during this season, I also have to mention that there was no irrigation that took place. So this was an unusual season in Salachane because we had excessive rainfall and farmers really did not get into the field to supplement the irrigation. So then on food security changes, during the baseline survey, which we carried out in 2013-14, 78% of farmers they indicated that 5 years prior to the baseline survey, they had experienced some shortages, food shortages. And we observed that at the end of first phase, that had reduced to 11%. And by end of second phase, that had gone more or less, it was the same with the end of first phase. But an increase was also observed during the COVID period. And this would have been more attributed to loss of off-farm income. This I've touched. Then we compared the TISA and non-TISA projects sites, within the Insiza district where Salachane is located, to see what was the impact of COVID, which was a proxy indicator for us for a shock. And we observed that across the 3 indicators that we're measuring, the farm income and food security, the non-TISA scheme had a higher proportion of farmers that had experienced an adverse change in these indicators. So what has been the conclusion that we've been able to draw from the experiences we have in TISA? So we have seen that the two-pronged approach that we're pursuing that Jamie has indicated has been able to transform the irrigation schemes to be more profitable and as a result, resilient to shocks. Thank you very much.
Was staying in time as a good presentation. That was the end of the 3 country teams. I would like to invite Peter Sturzager from CSIRO, the founder of the tools, to give a presentation, and after that we will have time for discussion. You ready?
Well, thank you very much. That's the landing page of the BIA website. Jamie's already explained the 2 major tools that we've developed. This one for measuring soil tension, and the other one for measuring soil solutes. The instruments all read by color, the colors have meaning, and they are thresholds for action. People-centered learning, we've spent a long time watching farmers, talking to farmers, what information would change your mind if we gave it to you. We've perfected these tools over many years, and there are tens of thousands of them out there now. The essential thing around all of this is that the equipment, the monitoring equipment, gives its output as a color. And I'm not going to go into these in any detail, but this top section here is water at 3 levels, with the blue, green, and the red, meaning wet, moist, and dry, and nitrate by color and salt by color. You've already heard a fair bit about the impact to farmers of using this, of yields increasing and especially saving water, lengthening the time between irrigations. But I want to focus on something a little bit differently today, because I've been walking around these irrigation schemes for 2 or 3 decades now, and I have many unanswered questions. And here's one scheme that a number of us visited a short while ago. This is Makuluba. It's about 20 hectares below this dam. And the first thing you need to see is how many people are involved. The EU, UK AID, Swedish, the UNDP. Then it's implemented by a consortium. And this is the rehabilitation. The original scheme built 15 years ago by completely different people has already collapsed. And this is the rebuild consortium. So the first thing to know is that there's lots and lots and lots of people involved. Here we have Bezel, the director of irrigation, filling up his car so we can get to Makuluba. It was desperate times back then. And here, and this video is not going to work because we just tested the time, but I just want to say something about this. I mean, the sound won't come on, it'll still run. No, it won't even run. Okay, so this farmer is holding a set of nitrate test strips and a syringe. And he's explaining to the interpreter how, if a chameleon is blue, your test strip will go white. Okay, this fairly complex idea of over-irrigation and nutrient leaching, because you've got to remember water-spree fertilizers is expensive. Okay, so if anyone cuts down on irrigation, their yields go up. And he's explaining this in an incredibly engaging way. And this is something we've seen over and over again, that this lesson is learned from the ground up. It's not taught, it's learned. It's learned. And and that's why farmers lengthen the interval between irrigations, because they see this effect. Now, last week there was an international irrigation conference, probably over 1,000 people, and this was the title of business talk. Curse or blessing, are smallholder irrigation schemes doomed to succeed? The chair is looking shocked. I have already fallen off my chair. What's he going to say? And he's sitting there hiding behind his mask. But he is the director, so he is the top guy in the country. And I don't want to get Bezel into more trouble than he's already in, but what I do want to say is that this is a talk that everybody needed to hear. Everybody needed to hear, because he spoke about how we are actually trapped in a second best solution that works for all of us, but not ultimately for smallholder irrigation. And if I spent the next day trying to work through this, and I came up with this kind of diagram that we always have, which is that smallholder irrigation is this mix between institutions and farmers and researchers. Obviously, I showed you on that sign how many institutions are involved, and then there's all the government, of course, farmers and advisors and all the input suppliers down here. And it's a fertile ground for researchers because there's so much going wrong. Now, all of these groups are under enormous pressure. And if you talk to any of these senior leaders, you will find out what pressure they are under from donors and governments, because irrigation is irresistible. And there's a whole lot of reasons where this pressure comes from. Farmers are under enormous pressure too. There's many things they can't control. And that means they can't experiment. And people often talk about their bandwidth. Poverty narrows your bandwidth. So you do the same things over and over again. And of course, researchers are under pressure that we know only too well, and it's getting worse. So how do we think through this? How do we actually get a conversation between these three groups that's just not sitting around and being nice to each other? And what I've done is I've taken this kind of knowledge production idea of, if you know it from, I'll remember the name in a minute. I've got it on the next slide. But this knowledge, mode 1 and mode 2 knowledge production, mode 1, which is discipline-based, more academic, mode 2, which is problem-centered, application-focused, and how we mediate between different groups who create and validate knowledge in different ways. Okay. Now, there's another form of knowledge called mode 0, which is the one that I've managed to stay away from for a long time, but I think today is the day because Bezel's given us permission to look into it. Here we go, knowledge production. Mode 1, academic, disciplinary, research focused. We all know all about that. Mode 2, problem-driven, application focused. And we need ways of mediating between these, because in mode 2, you've got these interdisciplinary teams who don't understand the specialty disciplines. And so this is where our patterns come in, where that pattern means something to a soil scientist, it means something to a plant physiologist, but it also means something to a farmer or whatever. The pattern is what we call a boundary object linking different knowledge domains. So what is mode 0? Well, given, sorry, it's mode 1, mode 2. Now, of course, scientists are trying to talk about mode 3, mode 4. Everyone's got their own mode of how science should be done. But these two here came up with mode 0, which is the hidden world of power and patronage. And they make this argument that at the end of the day, this is what drives what actually happens on the ground. This is what actually drives it. And how mode 0 interacts with mode 1 and 2. In our case, what we are trying to do in the BIA is to say, well, we can't just be nice to people if we're dealing with mode north. We've got to come up with data that really nails the message home, that everybody can understand, and that we can explain that, look, this thing's not working how it is, and how it should. And I can't explain these now, but if you integrate these color patterns, because they're tension patterns over whole schemes, and show which farmers are always wet and which ones are dry and what their yields are, or other schemes where you've got this very poor distribution of water, you can start to really nail what the problems really are and have a conversation around what you're going to do about it. And I think from our perspective, this is what's missing. Hard data that's hard to get as well, but that is needed to prosecute the very difficult conversations we need, because Bezel will tell you the amount of money that bleeds into these schemes is something that just can't go on. To summarize on a scientific note, boundary work is what we do, and I'll read this to you because I'm in my last minute, and I think it's a lovely, lovely summary of the game we're in from Clark et al. And it says, tensions arise at the interface between communities with different views of what constitutes reliable or useful knowledge. If an impermeable boundary emerges at the interface, no meaningful communication takes place across it. If the boundary is too porous, personal opinions mixed with validated facts, science gets mixed with politics, and the special value of research-based knowledge fails to materialize. Active boundary work is therefore required to construct and manage effectively the interfaces among various stakeholders engaged in harnessing knowledge to promote action. And that's the mission of the VIA. And what we can see here is a meeting we were having where farmers were complaining about service delivery. This is the director of irrigation, deputy director in Tanzania. There was an argument broke out and someone got the pattern out, the chameleon pattern out, to say this is what's actually happening. And then you have a real conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Well done. Okay, that was the end of the first set of papers, and there's now half an hour, 20 minutes for questions. And Jamie, are you having a way of controlling questions from the web?
So we.
No? Can we start a question from the room?
So we have our first question from, we've got got about 18 online. David Shearer, our ANU colleague, asks or notes, great presentations, insights and impacts from the work. Thanks, team. There are clear signs of moving from piloting to scaling. Can the team give some insight about how they are designing for future scaling up and scaling out, and who are the important partners for this future approach? So that is the question from David. Who would like to respond to that? Perhaps I will. Oh, Mario, did you want to respond to that? I'm just trying to find a microphone for you. This one isn't cooperating. Mario, can you come up here to respond, please?
Well, thank you for that question. I'll just mention a few things that have been happening in Mozambique since we also started this project. Of course, I have to first mention that there are sister projects running, also on the same perspective of supporting farmers to improve the irrigation practice using these tools. And that also, it has been evolving the National Irrigation Institute, which is the government, I would say, institute responsible for promoting and monitoring irrigation in the country. So this was somehow a strategy to have them familiarized and following, the changes that would be deriving from implementation of these tools. But alongside with that, let me also mention to you that we have been looking for partners recently to upscale these interventions to other regions. But of course, it comes in a cost. Somebody has to invest. The willingness, for instance, to pay for this kind of technologies there on the farmers that have experience, but for those that have not, I mentioned on my presentation that we are now sort of trying to include interventions with tools and the different irrigation initiatives that have been developed in the country. Recently, we managed and we succeed to bring funds from the World Bank, for instance, which is one of the key players back in Mozambique that is supporting irrigation. We think that by having such important donors and investors on irrigation activities in Mozambique being involved and promoting this, the use of this technology is very important. Because once they see in practice what these tools can do in terms of transforming the irrigation practice, then most likely is that we will have more future programs also including this kind of intervention. So this is what really I wanted to highlight in response to the question of what the country is doing. Thank you. I see. Oh, okay.
Mario, thank you. I think Tabani Dubé is going to respond to David's question. So we'll just have some responses to David's question, and then there's another question in the audience.
Okay. No, thank you very much. I think it's important to have the buy-in from government to start off with, because in terms of if this is to scale, I'm sure government and the private sector also are probably the two institutions that are wired really to operate at such scale. And I have to say, in the context of Zimbabwe, the buy-in from government is there, and we have been working well with government, and even the work we were doing just to demonstrate the scalability of the tools in Mad North also was heavily supported by government. So with the buy-in from government, I'm sure it will be easier to scale. Thank you.
Tabani, thank you. I think Ludifred would like to make a response in regard to Tanzania.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted to add, I really agree, wanted to also support the fact that it's important to have the buy-in from the government, but also other players. And just wanted to highlight our experience. So we started with scheme level, for example, agricultural innovation platforms, and blended all these interventions. But then there is a district level sort of platform that has evolved, and it has been very instrumental in, of course, bringing together different players across the district. So from extension officers, different players, private, so input suppliers, financing institutions, and this has been very instrumental in the scaling up process and out, and more so in the sense that now we have several schemes that have similar interventions, not intervention, but rather using the tools or using the learnings from the tools and the AIPs in addressing some of the challenges in their schemes. Just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I can respond briefly, the past 5 years of the TISA program, we were essentially trying to work out how to scale out the benefits and mainstream them more quickly. And so we have been working with provincial and district authorities. So, for example, in Zimbabwe, Engineer Chitsano and his colleagues have assisted with the scale out through the Matabeleland North Province. In Tanzania, in the Iringa district, for example, the idea has been to have one innovation platform at that larger government scale, network the businesses and the government support to try and get those benefits across the irrigation system at a multi-irrigation scheme scale. And so we're crunching the numbers at the moment to see if that has been successful. The initial indications are that in a number of districts it has been successful. I'm not convinced yet that we have succeeded in mainstreaming it across national government programs in every case, but that might be our next big challenge. Richard, I wonder if it's worth me putting you on the spot and just getting your reflections on how you see Via Farm and the tools scale.
Yeah. Yeah, well, there's two really big things. Number one is we subsidize all the wrong things. We subsidize concrete, power, fertilizer, drip irrigation, but we don't subsidize information that changes people and changes systems. We're quite happy to convey water around the countryside. We need to see information as infrastructure, and we need to put information into infrastructure budgets and not say that at the end of the day, there's going to be a problem and farmers are going to have to buy equipment, because if you spread water on the landscape, there will be a problem. It's just a question of when. So don't start monitoring when you've got a problem. Start learning long before you have a problem. Second issue is it's just been a huge battle to get equipment into the countries. I think we all know that. It is unbelievable. And I think that you simply, just to get stuff over the border, the price can double, and it can take months and months and months. And it's just I don't know who has the solution to it. Obviously, some things must get over borders. But we are right now looking to set up a BIA, public-private partnership in Malawi with the government and another startup there, where we think we just have to make the stuff in country. We think that's probably the only way we're going to get through all the red tape. Because there's, there's repairs, there's maintenance, there's all these other things that you have to be able to support a business with. So If you didn't know, the BIA became a not-for-profit the other day, and we are working along trying to make these supplements much more locally available.
Richard, thank you. And I think we had a question from our audience member down the back. If you'd like to ask your questions, I might repeat it into the microphone so that our colleagues online can hear it, or you can come up and ask.
Actually, partly answered one of what I wanted to ask.
Just need to talk into the microphone in this camera. So come around
Just
here.
like that?
Around here.
Okay.
And talk into that camera.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for the lovely discussion and to hear what's going on in the good works. Except you've bypassed my country. You've just gone to Mozambique, whatever, and decided to bypass Zambia. Yeah. So I wanted to talk about the issue that you just touched on, government involvement. So I had a privilege of doing some work with some people way back from Sweden. The major problem that I've seen in our African countries is when the people who are funding the project leave, the project dies. So like he alluded to, people subsidize things that maybe other people can do and leave things that are supposed to be subsidized. For instance, the project could be running well, maybe because there's this subsidies or there's a project officer who's usually knocking on government doors just to make sure things are happening. But once the phase of the project comes to an end, we have worse outcomes. So my question maybe was, do you have reflections of the sustainability aspect of the project in case of, and how that will be maybe combined with government policies? Because I'm looking at an issue whereby the provincial officer could come for a meeting, but maybe he's coming because there could be an allowance there or something. But like, how can that be part of his usual work? And how can maybe extension officers who go and see these farmers be involved at that extent? And final one, sorry, Jamie. I also wanted to talk about issues of, we're talking about impact. I wanted to find out how you're measuring impact, especially looking at the number of partners that are working with you, like to have issues of attribution and impact. How do you really know that this is really just a project and not other projects that are?
Thank you. Great questions. I'll answer your first one and then invite my African colleagues to come up and talk about, you know, what happens after the 30th of June next year when potentially we're not funded. Will the benefits that have been achieved so far be sustained, and if so, why? Or why not? Let me just start on the last question about how do we measure impact and attribution. So the TESA project has been established as a partnership formally with one partner in each of the countries and informally with another. So in each of the countries, we're formally partnered with either a local research institution or the relevant government agency, and informally with the others. And so it's been a partnership covering research and governance, as well as, of course, with the rural communities. In terms of how do we measure impact, we've had an initial before survey in early 2014, a follow-up household survey in 2017, and another household survey just now. And so that's provided some quantitative data that you've seen. We've also elaborated on that with some qualitative focus group research and interview-based data to tease out any of the questions that have arisen and do that. So I think our data is fairly solid. The question of attribution hasn't really arisen in that I think we've regarded it as a shared effort, and so we've all shared in the successes or failures. Let me
just add one thing to the. So Jamie talked about the surveys, but when we are talking about the yields and the gross margin proposal, I think it is important to stress that it's actually not based on surveys, they're based on farmers' fieldbook. The farmers, actually 20 farmers or more in each scheme, had a book that they brought to the field every day, and they took note about community readings, how much fertilizer they put on, what they paid for it, how much the harvest is, what the price was. So we, at the end of the day, could get fairly accurate yield and fairly accurate gross margin estimates. So that is far more accurate than a recall survey some years after.
With that, perhaps I could invite Mario and then Ludeford and Tabani, if they wish, to talk about whether you think the interventions are sustainable in the long term or not.
Well, thank you again. That was really a good question. And we have seen that filing in so many projects. But yes, we came out with some strategies, for instance, in Mozambique. One of them, of course, started by involving the extension officers. We have been providing training to extension officers on the tools, on the gross margin analysis, for instance, that we see that a critical aspect that should be there in place even without the project. We developed even materials that could be used by this group. The other thing is that when we run, for instance, the AIP, now we consider it, I mean, the establishment AIPs at different levels, but has a continuous practice, meaning that they will not stop, because the project is not there. One thing that also we have been monitoring, even if I go back to this innovative platform, is that we sort of promoted the very first meetings, but then we reduced our roles in terms of, being there implementing it, but then we were just monitoring what was happening. So this is a way also of assessing whether, these activity would be sort of sustained over time. But then I wanted to highlight that we had, of course, these AIPs running at different levels, farm level, district levels, and also we tried now to bring them even to the national levels. But also that brings me to the other issue that we've been discussing largely, tools, for instance, how the farmers can get access to tools, where, how. So we have been also throughout this project trying to establish a market for the tools, at least in Mozambique. Now, if you ask me where I can get them, easily I can tell you that you can go to a certain supplier and then he could get you the tools, available whenever they're needed, which somehow that is important. And of course, Richard maybe can mention something also about, the assistance, with the tools, but basically in terms of availability, of this kind of thing, they will be involved. And maybe to finalize here, my intervention is that, involving key players, that's really important for the success and sustainability, and in this project, we try as much as we could to have, the government officials and those responsible somehow for the irrigation being part of it. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe to respond to my sister from Zambia, I think there are definitely some areas that will suffer after the project comes to an end because they require resources to run. I mean, even if you take the innovation platforms, for example, bring people together, different stakeholders, someone else to fund that. The purchase of the tools, farmers have to have the resources, and of course, they have to be supplied. But there are some issues that I believe will be sustained, particularly the irrigation behavior of the farmers. Over time, I think farmers have learned that you can still get higher yields with the reduced irrigation. So with or without the tools, already that behavior, we are seeing it being entrenched in the farmers. So that is more likely to persist. But then the issue of scale without further support or some form of institutionalization, maybe by government or someone else, is unlikely to maybe go beyond the life of the project. But the behavior of farmers when it comes to irrigation in these irrigation schemes that we've been working in is more likely to remain even after the project. Thank you.
I'd just like to elaborate on two issues. So when in 2021, we asked the farmers, what would you do if there was no more tools? And close to 90% said that we have learned enough. We are not going to go back to our own ways. We now know what to do and what not to do. The other thing is that the first 4 years in TISA 1, we intervened quite intensively in places like Sri and September and Sengo. And in the second phase, we did not. But we saw a continued uptake of learning. We also saw that 76% of those who started changing in the first 4 years said that they continue to change. They continue to experiment with duration, with timing, with the number of siphons they use. So I think these are indicators that even those that the TISA team and the retreat, the process is ongoing. So the learning process among the farmers, as Richard talked about, it has been established and it will be very difficult to kill, I believe.
And let me just add that for many of the schemes, when we first intervened, there was a lot of conflict among farmers over water access, and that prevented cooperative behaviour to do things like bulk buy inputs at a cheaper price. And I think the tools have been critical in ensuring that for many of the farmers, they have fair access to water, and has eliminated that element of conflict within the farming community and has enabled collaboration. The second point is that the farmers, because they were growing, acting as subsistence farmers, weren't making a large profit and weren't able to pay scheme operation and maintenance fees. And what we have seen is that as farmers, through the TISA interventions, have been able to grow more profitable crops, they've then been willing to invest in scheme maintenance. And because the farming system is now much more profitable and that doesn't depend on governments, I would be confident that many of the benefits would be sustained after the project ends. It's driven by profit and private sector business, not by government policy. Go to Tony. Tony, would you like to just jump up and ask a question?
So 2 minutes, over 2 minutes, eh?
Yeah, and there's another question online too.
You said something. I know nothing about Africa. Sorry. I know a bit about South Asia, which should no longer depend on governments. I'm afraid it always will depend on governments. And the experience of the Green Revolution is what I'm going back to. It wouldn't have happened if at the top level of government had become involved, because there were so many special interests amongst the national scientists who were threatened by the new technology. Be aware of that. Threatened by the new technology. And only with the support of Ayub Khan, who was a dictator, military dictator in Pakistan, and Indira Gandhi, who hadn't been elected leader, was strongly in favour of it. Only with their support were they able to push through the changes, and with support from some of the key national program scientists, and embark on the Green Revolution, which turned around food production in that part of the world massively. They have to have the top level of government involved. Now we have one example in Africa, I think. I haven't been there lately, but it's Ethiopia under the President Meles. Very strong leader. He invested extremely heavily in extension. And I'm glad I heard mention of extension, because if you don't have extension on site, you're lost. You've got to have it on site somehow. And Ethiopia has seen notwithstanding all of its current problems, has seen a revolution in production of all of its crops. And it's because of a huge amount of money going from the government into extension and into farmer education. So I was glad to hear both those things mentioned during the discussion.
Thanks, Tony, and we really appreciate your reflections from your considerable experience. I'm just looking online here, and there is a comment from Neil Sutherland. Congratulations on the outcomes. In respect of overcoming supply chain and supply side issues, we had to rely on an oil company for remote area supplies in that its delivery pathways were the most reliable. Might that be an option here? I don't know if any of our African colleagues would like to comment briefly on how the changes have worked in terms of input supplies of things like seeds and fertilizers as a result of the project interventions, whether those commercial pathways are now adequate or whether there's some change required. Would either of you like to comment? Please, Ludifred.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you for the comment and question. Just wanted to quickly point out one example of, so after the engagement and interactions within the agricultural innovation platforms, the relationships that were forged between farmers and input suppliers, for example, have been very beneficial in the sense that they have, for example, in one of the schemes, these interactions facilitated an input store to be established in the scheme, because before then they had to go to Ringatown, which is a bit far, but also there have been arrangements in the sense that farmers and input suppliers have arrangements of getting inputs, quality inputs delivered, sometimes not on cash terms, but on some form of credit arrangements. So I think that is one of changes that occurred that demonstrate some of the beneficial aspects of the interventions. Thank you.
Ludifred, thank you. Richard, would you like to come up and comment?
Look, I was going to jump back onto Tony's comments around extension, if I may, and government, and I totally agree that they're both important. But I think water, Tony, is the one part of the Green Revolution that is more difficult than all the others. There is so much market failure around water because it's provided for free, but it costs a fortune. In our work, the biggest impact is, and the biggest benefit to the country from people using the monitoring equipment is water they don't use and someone else uses and makes money out of. And that's not picked up in any of the economics. Many farmers tell us we won't buy these tools because if there's no water in the, if I'm red on my chameleon and there's no water in the canal, then it doesn't help me. I want everybody to have them, you know? So there's, in other words, we need enough people so that we can vote we can demand our rights in a, you know, in a contested situation for water. So there's lots and lots of incredibly difficult things going on here. And the other one about training, I think Bezel and I were talking about training walking down here. You know, we've been training farmers, extension workers to death, I think. And what we've seen here is the difference between training and learning. And farmer learning is incredibly powerful. We never go to a scheme and say, you should get a pattern like this, or you should get this. We find out what people are doing and we say, is this what you meant to do? Is this what you want to do? What are other people doing? What pattern got the highest yield? What pattern do you think you could get, you know? So I think, yeah, I just think that water is the one field where we haven't made progress scientifically. I'm making a big claim here that, you know, in this country, adoption of soil water monitoring is going down amongst irrigators, and amongst smallholders, it is zero. We can't measure water in soil. I mean, we can, but in general, it just doesn't happen. And the market doesn't work. because of all the subsidies in the system and because of the benefits can't be captured by the investors. But if someone invests, you reap big rewards. And the question is, who should invest and how do you share the investment and how do you share the reward? That's the question. So it's really business. It's down to business and government to work this one out. I think in many ways, a lot of the tech's there now. But how do you, it's not about subsidy, it's about business. But how do we crack this?
Thank you. We're a little over our scheduled time for a break. I think what we might do now is take a break. We're due to resume again at 10 to 3.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, can I ask you to resume your seats and we will reconvene this seminar. And I think our online audience should be ready as well. We will start the second session with presentations by two of the TISA PhD scholars. The first of them is Karen Perry, who has done her PhD research on the role of youth in irrigation schemes in Zimbabwe, based on the Singasiana scheme that Donnie was talking about. Okay, Karen, 10 minutes.
Not sure if that's working. Thanks for the introduction, Henning. Thanks for everybody who's listening in through whatever medium. Yes, my name's Karen Parry. I'm a PhD student with the University of South Australia in Adelaide. My topic, youth livelihoods on small-scale irrigation schemes in Zimbabwe. In terms of connection to the TISA project, I connect through the project's interest in improving livelihoods and also their interest in understanding more about institutions. My project is not about looking at the impact of TISA on young people on irrigation schemes. My case study site is Sililekshani, wonderfully described by my colleague Tabani earlier. So youth livelihoods and irrigation. Well, we know that a large proportion of populations are young people, and many of those, indeed the majority, have informal work, and the economy is often very precarious. And that means that results in significant income vulnerability for young people. The challenge, therefore, is about increasing the productivity of those that are already working, as well as job creation, and that includes in the rural economy. Small-scale irrigation should be able to make a contribution to this challenge. To date, whilst there's been increasing research about young people in agriculture, there's been very limited research about young people on irrigation. So what is not clear from the context of my study is what are the livelihood pathways that young people are following, and what are the influences, what has shaped those pathways and the choices that they make. So I'm asking a few research questions, some around the institutions that influence livelihood pathways and activities, from the macro scale, looking at scheme and community, household, and down to the micro scale. And also about how young people are engaging with their local economy and the pathways that they've taken. To do this, my conceptual framework, I'm bringing together two institutional analysis frameworks, both very well known. One, the socio-ecological systems framework, which provides a beautifully structured way to look at issues and opportunities on irrigation schemes. I combine that with the institutional analysis framework that places much more focus on focal action situations, which can also be described as decision-making spaces for livelihood decision-making. And the things I've highlighted in red there are where I'll share just a small amount of my findings today. Capacities of those individuals associated with the decision-making process are clearly important. There's various other influences there, but they result in decisions about livelihood activities. The majority of young people have more than one activity, so I describe those as livelihood portfolios. My research design is very much qualitative dominant, undertook about 60 interviews on the Sila Lakshani scheme with the assistance of a research assistant. We interviewed practitioners, those who are scheme leaders or maybe involved with development on schemes, interviewed parents, and interviewed about 30 young people. And amongst that group was really trying to get a variety in terms of age, gender, marital status, livelihood activities, and importantly, scheme and non-scheme. And what I mean by that is many of the young people that are associated with households, they may be associated with a household that's actually a member of a scheme, but many more that live in villages around the irrigation scheme are not part of the irrigation scheme, so the scheme and non-scheme. My analysis in terms has been thematic analysis. It's drawn very much from the conceptual framework, but because the stories are so rich in terms of young people's livelihoods, I've also looked at those as individual case studies. So I just want to share a little bit about capacity and also livelihood pathways. So looking at the literature, I've come up with 6 dimensions of adaptive and innovation capacity and use that as a bit of a framework to look at the interviews. So you'll see those 6 capacities here. Resources is a bit of a bundle, physical, natural, and financial, and the others are probably fairly explanatory. And what I just want to share now is this is the amalgamation of several chapters of the thesis. So it's not everything, and it's just a snapshot to give you a sense of what are the sorts of things that are influencing young people's capacities and therefore their livelihood choices. So we've got things at the macro setting. Obviously in Zimbabwe, you can't go past the economic situation that influences financial resources. But we also have things like there's no available credit around the schemes. In terms of accessing natural resources, there's a complex combination, multi-tiered in terms of that land access rules. Let's just pick skills and knowledge. We hope that the education system would give young people a good foundation, but it's failing young people. But there's also social stigma for young women, single mothers to go to school. If we pick leadership, Richard mentioned the word patronage before, and that kicks in terms of influencing who may be able to engage in civic engagement and scheme leadership and so forth. So many different influences, and the capacities themselves are highly interrelated, as you can imagine. Mobility will affect how well you can maybe tap into training and other learning networks. So lots of interconnections happening in that space. The other aspect of my research that I'll just briefly share is I've explored young people's livelihood pathways using a matrix that combines both their livelihood portfolio, and in broad terms, we can think of that being on-farm or farm-related, or a mix of non-farm or non-farm only. And on the other scale, drawing very much from my qualitative research, I can broadly and loosely group young people into 3 different groups. Those that are struggling, they're not able to raise capital, and you'd say they're probably in survival mode. Those that are inching ahead have got some capital, can sort of inch themselves into an activity with a few resources, and those that are clearly branching out. So when we look at bringing together what we know about young people, this is sort of how they plot out from the sample that I looked at. Purple is males, green is females, the dark colour is those from scheme households, the lighter colour is those from non-scheme households. I can loosely identify 8 different pathways that young people around the scheme are following, some that have entered, like number 1, straight into scheme farming and have been able to go on and branch out fairly easily, in inverted commas, relative to the others. 2 is those that have really got a bit of a jump ahead by the resources that their parents have been able to support them with. 3 is all young women who've really married into irrigation but have been able to move into that inching ahead or branching out pathway. 4 is 2 young men who took probably approximately a decade with a lot of hard work and probably selling some goats to really inch their way into scheme irrigation, and they're getting ahead. And a big group at the bottom that are I would put in the struggling group. And it's important with this group to recognize that's not about age and gender. There's a mix of age and gender. There's a mix of scheme and non-scheme. So for one reason or another, there's quite a number of young people that get stuck at that phase. 6, 7, and 8 are very much about choosing a non-farm pathway to start with, and then maybe moving into scheme irrigation as an investment, or just sticking with non-farm interests. Important, I can't show it here, but some of these pathways take several decades, but I want to point out the importance of non-farm in terms of supporting that inching ahead and branching out process. So I just want to finish with what I'm describing as my broad intervention themes in my final chapter. As an overarching point, I think, I hope I've just demonstrated just a little bit of the complexity and the diversity amongst young people, which I think requires us to think about flexible approaches, not least for these 3 groupings, and how we might capitalize on those that have more capacity and how we might support the others in different ways. But I've identified 4 broad themes that I think we need to think about, and just some examples of policy. One, I think, just purely about irrigation, we need to be increasing the number of young people that are engaged in irrigation, both for their own productivity, but also for scheme renewal. And one option we might think about is supporting those that are elderly to exit from irrigation by giving them some security in alternative means, because we can't do that. We can't swap our young people for our elderly farmers without giving those elderly farmers some support. Establishing and strengthening youth learning networks. My contention is that the education system is failing young people. We need to capitalize on informal learning opportunities and build those and maximize those as much as possible, but with attention to mobility. Moving around the schemes, Shani is big. Some people live 20 kilometers away from the scheme, and moving around is very difficult. We need to be empowering young people in decision making. That's not only within the household, that's also in the scheme in terms of scheme leadership. So one example of policy might be to consider multi-generational governance process to assist with that process of having more young people engaged in scheme irrigation, as an example. The final one, we need more opportunities. We need a broader landscape of opportunity. Irrigation can be a driver, but we need to give particular attention to non-farm activities. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mary. So next we'll move on to the next PhD candidate, Michael Wellington, here from ANU. And Michael has been doing his PhD on aspects of remote sensing, and we'll talk to you about trans and border productivity of smallholder irrigation. Okay, Michael, over to you.
Thank you. We've just returned from the International Irrigation Conference in Adelaide, and then taken a fantastic trip through the Riverina, where we've heard about decades of research and innovation towards more crop per drop and irrigation efficiency. And while that sounds like a sensible thing to work towards and quite definitive, it's actually quite an ambiguous concept, because we don't know if more crop per drop is producing a lot more crops with only a few more drops, more crops with the same volume of drops, or can we actually decouple crop production from irrigated water consumption and have more crops with less drops? And that's where we get into some of this literature around the paradoxes of irrigation efficiency and other paradoxes described by someone called Jevon and others over the years. It's quite important to understand how these two trends relate, crop production and water use, not least because they relate strongly to the Sustainable Development Goals. We've got SDG 2 for zero hunger, for which we need to produce more food for our growing population, and SDG 6 related to clean water and sanitation, but specifically SDG 6.4.1 tells us that we need to improve and continually maintain methods to monitor changes in water use efficiency over time. And so my PhD work has focused on applications of geospatial remote sensing analyses to these research questions. What does that mean for the teaser project, which we've heard about a lot already this afternoon? The hypothesis or the research question is, can crop production BT coupled from irrigated water consumption at the irrigation scheme scale. We've already heard from my colleagues, Tabani, Dubé and others, that decoupling can occur at the farmer's plot scale. The reference there to Martin Moyer, which Tabani told us about earlier. We saw improved yields there with savings of water through decreasing the frequency of irrigations and also decreasing the volume of irrigations. But what about the redistribution of that saved water to other plots in the irrigation schemes? We know that there's been an increase in plot activity and plot occupancy at the irrigation schemes. So there could be a paradox there in that water saved at the plot scale may not relate to savings at the scheme scale. Remote sensing is an appropriate and useful method to attack some of these questions. The advantage of remote sensing is that it's quite scalable across space and time. I can apply it to any irrigation scheme anywhere in the world, in theory, from the comfort of my own desk, just in the building next door. The trade-off there is with some of the accuracy and the tangibility of the measures that we use. So we have to use proxies for crop growth and also for water consumption. And for crop growth, we use gross primary productivity, or GPP, which is the gross photosynthesis of plants. And for water consumption, we use evapotranspiration, the sum of evaporation of water from the soil surface and transpiration of water through the leaves of a crop as it grows. Once we have estimated those variables from satellite imagery, climatic data, and other data sources over a reasonable period of time, we put it through a spatio-temporal statistical model to estimate trends in space and time. Those two dot points have occupied my research effort for the best part of the last 2 years. But all you need to know is that we're using GPP for crop growth, ET for water consumption, and the rest is rather boring. So I'll continue on to what it actually means for the teaser project. I did that for all 6 of the original schemes, and I'll just point out the Landella block, which we've heard about from Karen and Tabani earlier at Siwalachani, and of course the rest of the schemes in each of the 3 countries. So what did we find? The results were varied. We did very excitingly see decoupling of GPP from ET at some schemes, but not all. So let's take the Landella block as an example. The top chart there shows water use efficiency, so the ratio of GPP to ET over time. As we saw in Tabani's presentation, the increase in water use efficiency or water productivity, as Tabani said, was driven by an increase in GPP from 2017 after the AIPs and the tools and some of the policy constraints were overcome there at Landella. But what was really interesting is that we didn't see an associated increase in ET. So this increase in water use efficiencies driven by increased plant productivity, and evapotranspiration has actually decreased. So I had a bit of trouble convincing some of my learned supervisors and colleagues at CSIRO, crop physiologists and the like, that this phenomenon was really possible, because certainly at larger scales we see that GPP is almost completely linearly related and driven by ET. So the biophysical explanation is that we've got transpiration there in green, water coming through the leaves of the plant, and evaporation in red. And what we see early in 2013 and 14 is that evaporation exceeds transpiration. So we've got applied water going on to the irrigation scheme. Most of it is lost to the atmosphere via evaporation, and a smaller proportion is allocated to growth of the crop. Really, I think interestingly and quite fascinating is that those 2 lines cross over the period, and by the end of the period there in 2021, transpiration is exceeding evaporation. So most of the water that's lost to the atmosphere is allocated to crop growth rather than evaporation. So that's the biophysical mechanism and explanation for that phenomenon that we've observed. The same is true in space. So we estimated the spatial trend as well through the stats model. The first thing to notice there is that in the top left, evapotranspiration ET is less variable than its components, and we know that because we see less contours in ET than we see in transpiration and evaporation. The second thing to notice is that transpiration is almost completely related to GPP, which we expect it's pretty much impossible to grow more plants or grow more crops without increasing transpiration. But again, we see that inverse relationship between evaporation and transpiration. So if we take the top right or the northeast corner of the Landella block, we see higher rates of evaporation, lower rates of transpiration. That's associated with lower GPP, and we can identify that that might be an underperforming area of the plot where it's getting waterlogged, it might be over-irrigated, and as a result, crop growth is suffering, but we're still losing a fair bit of water to the atmosphere. I should emphasise, as I mentioned at the outset of the results, that they were very mixed, and I think the phenomena that are observable at Landella are very exciting, but we didn't observe them at all of the schemes. So if we take, for example, the Magosi scheme there, shown in the bottom left for GPP, and again for evaporation, transpiration, and ET, it's quite interesting that the GPP at Magosi appears to be driven much more by evaporation than transpiration. And I think that's because that's a flood irrigated rice system. So I think we need to do a bit more work in terms of teasing out how these different things perform in different farming systems. So I think it's exciting that we've identified that crop productivity can be decoupled from water consumption, and we can infer from that that more food can be grown with less water, but as I said, results are context dependent, and we need to have a look at how these things work in different farming systems. In the future, it's taken me a few months to generate those results for the 6 original teaser schemes. So I think there's some work to be done on developing software and products to more rapidly assess different irrigation schemes. We've heard about the amount of money that's being invested in irrigation schemes across Africa. There are hundreds and hundreds of them, so cheap ways of assessing them through remote sensing are quite attractive. And we can do that with the better sensors that are being launched and more crop-specific production models. I just wanted to finish by thanking in particular my colleagues from both the African nations and Australia. I've been watching the presentations this afternoon and just reflecting on the week we've had, but also the last few years of my modest involvement in the teaser project. And I've certainly learned a lot from everyone who's been involved. It's a great privilege to be part of a project that covers so many different countries with people from different expertise. And I'm very grateful for the insights that I'll take with me for the rest of my career. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. We'll now go on to a paper by Dr. Enjo Nyoni. Enjo is a capacity strengthening manager at the Food, Agriculture and Natural Resources Policy Analysis, that's also known as FANOPA, based in Pretoria in South Africa. He will be talking about the importance of transforming small-scale irrigation schemes in the context of achieving the CAP and Malibu targets.
Thanks, Henning. Good afternoon, everyone. So, food and nutrition security has long been a problem globally and in the African continent as well. And at a global level, we currently have the SDGs that are guiding our attempts to address the food challenges that we have. At a continental level, we have what is known as the Malabo Declaration, which is the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program, a flagship program that was established in 2003 by the heads of state to address the challenges that we're facing in terms of food security, nutrition security, as well as poverty in the continent. Acknowledging that agriculture is at the center of our development as a continent, we prioritized the development of agriculture. We came up with a strategy, a framework of how to monitor, how to invest in agriculture and how to monitor our performance in agriculture. So in 2003, as I mentioned, the CAADP framework was established by the heads of states across the 55 countries in Africa. We then, in 2014, established what the Malabo being looking at our performance. The initial CAADP was established based on the Maputo Declaration because it was signed in Maputo. The Malabo one was signed in Guinea, in Malabo, in 2014, reflecting on the performance of our agriculture as a continent. There was an agreement that we need to monitor how we are performing at a country level and have this mutual accountability in our performance, because there was nothing that was really showing how we were performing from the get-go. So in 2018, we had our first report, which is the inaugural biennial review report, outlining our performance as a continent. We've had 3 reports so far, and the last one was launched in March this year, the 3rd biennial review report. And basically, it shows, for example, what our commitments are. Commitment number 3 is on ending hunger, but our ambitions as the African continent and by our heads of states have been very high, great ambitions. We've been ambitious here. The SDGs have targets by 2030. Our targets is ending hunger by 2025. So we've been monitoring our performance in that regard. This just shows the summary of how the biennial review process has been happening. And these are the benchmarks that we had. In 2017, the first biennial review report had a benchmark of 3.94 over 10. So this is how, if you were scored above 3.94, you were on track to achieving the biennial review, the CAADP Malabo Declaration targets. And in 2021, with the report that was launched in March this year, our target was 7.28 in agriculture, to show how we're performing in the agriculture space. Now, this is the global picture of the African continent. And you see our green shows that you are on track when you have a green color. The country that has a green color is on track to achieving the CAADP Malabo Declaration targets. And you see that so this is the benchmark, with only one country that is on track now to achieving the targets that we have in agriculture. Most of the countries are in red, and the ones in blue are said to be progressing well, but they are not yet there in terms of being targeted. And this is just a summary of what I've presented, with just one country, Rwanda, that is on track. This is a regional perspective of the performance of the countries. And you see that the Southern African region here is not doing very well. We were on track initially, but we're still struggling. We are not inching ahead, as Karen would say. So TISA interventions, as highlighted and demonstrated, we had the tools. We have also the AIP process that was invested since 2018. And some of the key benefits that we've realized have been presented by colleagues. So I won't dwell much on this. So it's resource use efficiency. We've seen the reduction in terms of watering in the respective irrigation schemes that we've been working with. And this, we have linked it with the Malabo Declaration. How are we benefiting as a continent? How are we benefiting its respective countries? How are the results that we're getting adding or contributing to the targets of Malabo? And then we've seen also the crop production. We've increased productivity has been presented. So maybe I'll not dwell much on this, but we've linked with PC is the performance category under a specific commitment in the Malabo Declaration. We've got 7 commitments, as I showed earlier on, and these performance categories, they lie under those specific commitments that we have. We've got social changes that we've observed as well. with information improvement. We've got women participation in agriculture improving. We also have access to markets, which is a very important aspect of the kind of Zimbabwe Declaration. So this is the general picture, just to summarize. In terms of our current performance as a continent, we have the target countries that I've listed here. We've got Mozambique, Tanzania, and Zimbabwe. And in terms of access to inputs and technology, which is one of the key performance categories that we've monitored, we are looking at 1.772 for Mozambique out of a score of 7.92. It shows that there is still a huge gap that we need to be addressing in terms of this particular performance category here. Tanzania, Zimbabwe, all are in red. And with our interventions in TISA, we have seen that the tools as well as the ARPs have enhanced water use efficiency, which is a very important contributor to the targets that we have. Then we also have the agricultural productivity. We see we are in red here, and there's need for us to improve as the respective countries. And in some areas like the performance category 4.4, you see that we've got zeros here and zeros here. There is some work that is happening, but the data collection processes still need to be improved in some of these areas. And it's something that we need to be focusing on as well and improving in our context in the African continent. Up until building resilience here, Zimbabwe is the only country that seems to be performing well, and one of the few in the continent that is performing well in terms of building resilience of countries. So resilience of communities. And then with our food and agriculture, we're looking at the SDGs. Food and agriculture becomes important, contributing to all. Michael here highlighted the significance of addressing some of these challenges. 6 point in commitment number 6, commitment number 2. But you will note that all of the 17 SDGs goals that we have, really food is at the center. It has an opportunity. We have an opportunity when we're improving our food and agriculture. We have opportunities also to address the challenges that we're faced with across the 17 development goals. So as FANAPAN, we have packaged these messages that we've developed from TISA. We've gotten from TISA, fed them into development processes. We've engaged with the government, with the different governments, Zimbabwe government there, Mozambique, Tanzania, but also the SADC region and the African Union Commission, sharing these key messages. One of the key aspects that we need to invest in convening these different platforms that we have is ensuring that we package even the champions that deliver the messages. We need to bring also the farmers to speak for themselves. I see that in the conversations, there's a lot of us that speak on behalf of the farmers, which is okay. But we still also, in these platforms that we convene, need to bring the farmers to also speak for themselves. And we have a conference that we are convening next year in March, where we're going to bring all these different stakeholders. Richard was saying that we need to have a conversation, and we are creating that platform to discuss these issues. There is an opportunity to improve our agriculture, which is failing in the continent and globally by investing in some of these innovations. We showed the importance of these interventions at a smaller scale, but there's an opportunity to scale up and scale out, and we need to have that conversation across with the different stakeholders. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew. The next presentation is going to be online, and while Jamie does the featuring, the computer, I will introduce the next speaker, Anna Manero. Anna was a PhD student that joined PhD of UNISA and ANU. She did it in collaboration with our colleagues in Tanzania on the schemes that Ludwig was talking about. on the inequality in irrigation schemes. And I will today be talking about growth and inequality at the micro scale and empirical analysis of farm incomes and smallholder irrigation schemes in Zimbabwe, Tanzania, and Mozambique. Is she there?
Anna, are you able to share screen now?
Let me try again. No. Oh, someone else is sharing their screen, so I can share screen. But I'm just getting a message saying you can share screen while the other
Can be seen but not heard.
It's most undesirable.
That's great.
Anna, try
There you
sharing
go.
screen now.
I'll do that now. Thank you.
So I will take a look. Yes.
Okay. Can you screen to share?
Needs to activate soon.
Is that looking okay?
Cheers. Cheers.
Sorry. Anna, we've just got two screens here and I haven't got you on the right one to view. Let me see what I can do. Anna, I can't hear you either. Can you speak?
Yes, I'm here.
It's not coming through for some reason.
Yeah.
Friends, we just have a momentary IT challenge. We're just going to get our IT guru to come and fix it. And so it will take a couple of minutes. My apologies. So the idea is that we will have Dr. Anna Monero talk about growth and inequality at the micro scale, looking at the small-scale irrigation schemes. And that will then conclude our presentations, and the remaining time we will have available for some discussion, which was most fruitful, I must say, earlier in the day. And so I am ad-libbing here in the hope that our IT guru will appear very soon, because for some reason I cannot get Anna's presentation on the right screen and the audio is not behaving. So I'm sure there is a solution. It will no doubt come to us soon. And so your ongoing patience is greatly appreciated.
You might add that Anna is currently a postdoc at the Crawford School and here at ANU. Here comes Tegel.
Excellent. So I'm going to beg the indulgence of my good friend and colleague Steve Lay, who's going to explain why I've been such an IT troglodyte, and move Anna's presentation onto the right screen and see if the audio can be made to work. That was easy. Why didn't I think of that?
Are you not getting audio?
No.
Hello?
Okay.
Anna's waiting.
Oh, Anna is waiting. She's ready to go. Let's this head to her.
The computer's actually making voices.
This one? I do not know. Steve, you know so well, IT was never a skill that I put on my resume. Ah, that's sounding better. Anna, can you please grace us with a few words of wisdom?
Hello, everyone. I'm speaking to you from the Noongar Whadjuk country in what is now the southwest of Western Australia. I'm based in the city of Perth. So I say hello to everyone who is in different locations. Is that audio working?
Okay, you're coming out of the wrong hole at the moment. We can hear you, but it's the computer, not the big speakers. Just give me a moment. Okay, keep talking now.
So I completed my PhD on the TISA project between 2014 and 2017, and I had the pleasure.
Okay, sorry, it's not working. Just give us a moment. Wait, the back of the computer. Yep.
Looks like it might be the old plug it in trick.
Okay, so we're getting sounds from that. Okay, can you try talking now, Anna? We'll see if we can hear you.
Oh, hello.
Yes.
Testing, testing. Okay.
Yes.
Can you turn it up?
Try that.
Yes, and the presentation appears okay in that screen. And
we can see your shared screen.
can you see the whole screen?
Yes.
Yes, although your head's in front of it.
Yes, that's the purpose. I hover. All right, so thanks everyone for your patience.
Difficulties, so I'll hand you over to Anna for her presentation.
Okay. Thanks everyone for your patience and holding in there. Thanks for, unfortunately, I haven't been able to join the workshop in person. I'm based in the Noongar Whadjuk country in what's now the southwest of Western Australia. I'm based in the city of Perth, and this is where I was based during my PhD that I did through the TISA project under the supervision of Jamie Henning and also Professor Sarah Wheeler and Professor Quentin Grafton, who is now also my supervisor at the Water Justice Hub, where I'm doing a postdoc. So my involvement in the TISA project and the work that I did through the PhD, what I want to talk to you today is about inequality. We hear a lot about growth and how growth is important, but we know that that growth is not going to be successful in alleviating poverty unless that growth helps the poor more than it helps anyone else. And there's different barriers that farmers face, and some are what we call inequality of opportunity, and that is like different opportunities that farmers have to generate those incomes, and that could be the difference in opportunity of where the plot is located in the scheme. They could also have differences in how they can access other services like transportation, like access to inputs or knowledge. And we know that these inequality of opportunity translates into inequalities of outcome, and that inequality of outcome can be reflected in the differences in crop yields, as we've seen in other presentations, and also in net crop production, and also in incomes. And then this link between the inequality of opportunity and inequality of outcome means that there is a connection that is cyclical. So those farmers who have a better opportunity, they can have better outcomes, and by having better outcomes, they're able to reinvest those profits in generating better opportunities for themselves. So what really intrigues me about inequality is that it's deeply linked to poverty and growth. And this was coined by François Bourguignon in a paper in 2004, and it's widely been discussed. It's a triangle. We call it the poverty growth inequality triangle. And what this says is that growth will be successful in reducing poverty as long as that growth benefits the poor more than it benefits anyone else. So if the aim of a policy is to reduce poverty, that can be done through two mechanisms that can be independent or conjoined, and that's increasing growth and also decreasing inequality. This is tremendously important in the developing world because growth alone will not be successful in reducing poverty everywhere. There's another another body of work coming from Martin Ravagnon, who's it's at the World Bank and also at Georgetown University. He's done a great amount of work in showing how inequality is generally not good for the poor. And this is for a number of reasons. And there's a bit of a pushback perhaps in the economics profession, where we think that inequality is less evil. And the reason why this is because there's this common assumption that as countries progress in the development trajectory, inequality will rise as growth rises, and then eventually that growth will trickle down and will benefit the poor. And this thinking is underpinned by the Kuznets curves theory, which was proposed by Simon Kuznets in 1955. And this was just a theory. It was just an idea. And the work of Ravagnon and Bourguignon have demonstrated that this is not always the case. Yes, there are some countries where the inequality rises as growth rises, and then that trickles down. But in other places, this does not happen. So there's already a lot of work and evidence at the macro scale, looking at this pull and push factor between growth, inequality, and poverty between countries and within countries. But we have virtually no data at the small scale. And this is where the work that I did during my PhD comes into play, because it is really at the small scales that some of the most important impacts occur to farmers. Yes, we know that inequality at the country scale is important, but also at the small scales, where farmer to farm, the differences between farmers are tremendously important for the opportunities that these farmers have to get out of poverty. So we had 3 data points resulting from the surveys that were carried out by the in-country teams in 2014 and 2017 and 2021. So we see that during the phase 1 of the project, there was generally a growth in incomes, and in some schemes, the inequality reduced and others increased. And over the second phase, which coincided, unfortunately, with the global pandemic, on average, those incomes were reduced, but also the inequality seemed to be reduced. So what we're trying to understand here is what's the connection between the growth and the inequality. So when we look, these data points represent the different countries and the different phases of the growth. And if we look at the whole of the countries as a whole, it does appear that greater levels of growth are associated with a reduction in inequality. But what is perhaps surprising is that when we look at the data country by scheme, that relationship is inverted. So when we look at the scale of the schemes, higher levels of growth are associated with an increase in inequality. So this is where it's really important when we look at the data and we try to define policies based on this data analysis, that we understand what scale are we looking at, because aggregating data can lead to erroneous conclusions about what's happening really at the level of the schemes. So if we wanted to understand what's happening with that Kuznets curves, is there Kuznets curves for the smallholder farmer schemes? Again, if we look at all the schemes, it looks at that curve is inverted. So as countries, they progress in generating more incomes, the inequality reduces, and then it goes up. But again, the story is different when we look at scheme by scheme. And in some schemes, that inverted U curve, it is reproduced, like Magosi and the 25 of September, that it does seem that as the countries progress in generating more incomes, inequality rises and then falls. But in Kiweri and Silalachani, it's inverted. So I know this presentation may have been a bit technical. There was a lot of numbers and graphs, and I went through it quickly, but I think that the bottom line that I want you to remember is that poverty, growth, and inequality are connected, and to successfully reduce poverty, it is important to consider those both other dimensions, growth and inequality. And that it is tremendously important to have good quality data at the level of the scheme where these interventions are designed, because aggregating data between countries can lead to erroneous conclusions about how those dynamics play at the small scale. And this concludes my presentation. I thank you for listening. Thanks again for holding on through the technical glitches, and please reach out if you want to know more.
Hang on, because we're now going into a question and answer session, and there might be some for you.
Excellent. Henning, do we want to take any questions from the floor? And I've got one here online from David Lucas too.
Maybe to see if there's any questions from the floor, please. Go ahead. So, excellent presentations. Questions? Don't seem to be the case here.
Excellent. So, David Lucas asks, will we be saying something about the future of the project? And so, David, the situation is the project is funded through to the 30th of June next year. We will have an opportunity to come together in Pretoria next March in a joint conference with a number of the African regional institutions and South African research agencies, with the Via Farm project and TESA, to present our findings and share those. TESA is looking at what we might do for a third phase, and in particular is looking at some of the lessons that have been presented in relation to the irrigation farmers who've saved a lot of labour time on the schemes, and where they put that extra time in terms of integrating their irrigation production along with their dryland household farm plots and along with any livestock that they are sustaining. And so what we've observed is that virtually no irrigation farmer is an irrigation farmer alone, and that when they have saved labour, they've often sought to diversify their farming business or indeed set up an off-farm business, and that has benefited the irrigation farming in terms of potentially providing more income. And so we're interested in how more circular links can be made from the irrigation schemes into things like livestock production that then produces, for example, manures that can go back into more productive irrigation. So we are pedaling fast to try and see if we can produce a project that will be funded to head in that direction. Our hope would be that that would continue to be based on the two interventions with tools and with innovation platforms, but perhaps expand that to include the full local economy based around these irrigation schemes. I don't know if any of my colleagues wish to add to that in any way. Around the room, not at this point. Any other questions or comments at this point in time? Richard, I don't know if you've had a further chance to think about Michael's presentation, but I wonder whether you see any value in that sort of remote sensing approach in a way as providing some sort of independent validation of the impact of the tools. Did you want to come up and have a quick comment up here?
Actually, I'm no expert, Michael, so you're very safe. But Imi's doing a lot on this too. Lisa Marie Rebello, I think, and others. Obviously, the data, it's incredible data. And we almost collect the opposite kinds of data in the sense that the chameleon data is highly accurate just in a location, but just in a location. And remote sensing, you know, is irresistible, I suppose, and how the two are brought together. I think there's something to be done there. Yeah.
We are privileged to be joined by Basil Chitano, and I don't know whether, Basil, I can put you on the spot and perhaps invite you to make any comments about how you see the development of irrigated agriculture in Zimbabwe and the role of the tools or the other interventions in terms of assisting your government meet its priorities. Is that something you would feel comfortable about commenting on?
Okay, I can. Now that I'm here,
do you want to come up here and talk to the microphone?
Make a few statements around that. I didn't want to talk when I came here. I wanted to just spy on you guys and understand what you really are up to. But because it gave me the opportunity to talk, I will just take advantage. I think there's so much that's happening, so much that we are learning from each other. And the question around what do we do next has been asked not only once, but several times. And I think it's a long journey that we have to pursue until we get there, exactly where we want to be. In my earlier remarks at the ICID conference, I was talking about the idea around smallholder irrigation development. And I was arguing that it seems like we are doomed to make smallholder irrigation development a success. At all costs, I think we all agree that some of us have spent their professional life working with smallholder farmers just to make them successful. Year in, year out, we've got a new program, a new intervention that is addressing issues around water management, issues around increasing productivity, issues around capacity building of the farmers, also issues around capacity building of the institutions. So it's something that we assist with and we are going to persist with, at least for a good long future, until we get to that point where we say, now that we have found a solution that is going to address the generality of our problems or the problems that smallholder farmers are faced with. The most interesting is the giant step that colleagues from the VIA and CSIR have taken to take the risk to pursue the development of the sensors and the chameleon technologies and so forth. the effort of trying to see what they can do and generate debate around the innovation platforms to say, what are the farmers really saying? What can we learn from the farmers? And it has been quite an exciting, invention to us from the government of Zimbabwe. And we took it on a positive, note with our interactions with colleagues from research, whom we've been working for more than 40 years in Zim, and we've been doing quite a lot of exchanges around livestock, around irrigation also. And it looks like we are now converging, especially in light of the talk around the impacts of climate change. It's hitting hard on us, even worse for our colleagues in Mozambique, especially when it comes to the heavy downpours that we are witnessing, or we've been witnessing in the past 5 to 10 years, which start probably as far as Zambia, Zimbabwe, but the worst of the affected would be the colleagues on the shorelines in Mozambique. But then at the same time, we've been experiencing a lot of mid-season dry spells, whereby we start on a good note in terms of our rain forecast and everything else, and farmers are so excited, especially on the rain trade, agriculture. And then along the course of the growing season, we get a 2-week, 3-week, 1-month dry spell. And then we actually lose the bulk of the cropping. Sometimes we register a lot of write-offs in terms of the crops. Then that makes irrigation development more of a priority, to focus not only on the small communal development, but with a national kind of overview to say, how can we maximize with the little resources that are there, with the water? What can we do to save the water? Because remember, the land, we say it's not an issue when it comes to land, but when it comes to water now, for irrigation, with competition around water, it becomes an issue. And we need to make sure that we make every drop, counts. And we are so thankful that at least we have got this, amongst other technologies, to monitor water use and so forth, the irrigation scheduling, the VIA that is coming in. And we had already, maybe 2 years ago, made the deliberate, decision to engrave the, adoption of the VIA into our programming. We have got a small program within our small budget, which is, trying to make it a homegrown kind of, issue, where we support monitoring of, activities around what's happening with the census. We have had a bit of some, bad experiences here and there in terms of, we get the census, we install them, we train the farmers, but then here and there we get issues around vandalism, issues around, even distraction, even by rodents, especially, that are coming into, just, attack the material that is making the key to make the census actually really work. And talking about the business case now, there are opportunities around, public-private, partnerships. It would be unfair to leave this job to the researchers and think that the researchers will turn it around into business. It would be unfair again to expect much from the private sector to go it alone on their own. Because remember, the people from the private sector are always thinking about money, and they always want to make money, and they want the shortest route to making money. And we need to continue to engage even with ourselves from the bureaucracies, from governments. Governments are actually transforming. We are transforming from the handout approach, where we've been coming up with a lot of grants, to cost recovery. We are saying our interventions must be sustainable, and we must be able to recover the costs so that we can continue. So you can imagine that we've been developing irrigation since time immemorial, but now we've come to that point whereby governments are having too many of issues to attend to. And what that calls for is that we need to change our approaches to say, where we are putting in investments, especially in the development of infrastructure for, in fact, shared infrastructure for the benefit of the communities, and also for the benefit of of livelihoods, the business case is coming in, and then government comes in with an idea that we need to find a way of recovering at least the cost without making the profit, but at least to say we put up infrastructure, but we're able to recover it so that we can take the same savings, same recoveries, and replicate it elsewhere. So there's a lot that needs to be done to bring in the three, the academia, the policy, and the farmers to the table. And we are also thinking around saying what are the farmers going to be contributing. So our programming is also going to be demanding a little bit of commitment from the farmers to say, with the little that you have, what can you put on the table so that the issue of ownership is actually addressed at that entry level, instead of, like, if you've been to our country, you will see us coming in to discuss programming around, say, exploitation of water in the dams. We crowd in all the local leadership, the elders and so forth, and all the women will be ululating, the politicians will be coming in, we're coming with a program and so forth, but the farmers are not, besides the land that they are domiciled on, they are really coming in with nothing of a financial value to say we are contributing this to the project that's going to sustain us for the next 100 years or so. So the mindset is actually having to change, and we are trying to get it back on the ground to say the farmers must also be able to unlock value from the small assets that they have got livestock, they've got this and that, which we think that we could unlock some value and make them contribute something so that we can enhance, the issues around ownership. So yeah, I think I've said much, and I'm sure if you allow me to talk, I will continue to talk. Thank you so much. Yeah.
So we just have one final question from online from Maggie, who asks, unless I missed it during a brief absence, I would appreciate knowing how and to what extent women were involved and their demographic characteristics, for example, age, married, etc. I'm just looking to my colleagues to see who's most familiar with the household survey data on that. And while I'm waiting for one of them to volunteer to come up and more precisely address Maggie's question, let me start by saying that in the context of the research, we sought to have, as far as possible, equal engagement with women and men in terms of who are the farmers who receive tools, in terms of the survey engagement. In Mozambique and Zimbabwe, there's something of a feminisation in agriculture. So actually the majority of farmers we were dealing with in those countries are women. And some of the early 2017 survey results suggested that the project interventions actually created more opportunities for women to assert their leadership. And so there was something like a 30% increase in women in decision-making roles in their communities. I'm just looking to see if there's anybody else who would like to make a quick comment on that point. Henny?
Thank you for that question. That is something that has been on our mind. While it is not a objective of TISA to particularly address gender issues, as Jamie said, there have been a clear shift from we started to 2021 in the ask a range of questions about women's participation in decision making and in information gathering, etc. And there have been a clear shift toward joint decision making and toward the main decision making being by females. Though in most schemes, the majority is still made by male. In Tanzania, we have some interesting breakdown on our analysis of gross margin that shows that female-led farming households had the highest increase in gross margin compared to male-led households. And that support our observations in the field in both Tanzania and Zimbabwe, that it is the women that have been most aggressive in adopting the higher value crops. We are still in the middle of analyzing the data from the end of phase 2 surveys, and we are having significant disaggregation of our findings on gender and age that we cannot report on yet, but it is forthcoming. Maybe a few comments to your bit about the government and private, and I totally agree that it is critical that we have co-contribution from all parties. And I think we can report from our Tanzanian experience that we got a storage for rice and a rice mill, and in both instances it was the farmers contributing material and labor, and both the district and the national government contributed towards some of the other costs around machinery and other things. I think we can also report from Silesiana that one day after, toward the end of phase 1, we came to the Silesiana and we saw big piles of barbed wire and other things floating on the ground. And we said, what is this? Oh, you remember that our vision was that we have fenced in the canals, the cattle couldn't get there. So we have decided, the team didn't know this, to pay another $5 a year or a month or something to pay for barbed wire and fencing. So we are now going, we have the material is over there, we're going to put it up. So I think once we brings to the scheme that farming becomes profitable, getting access to the water becomes profitable, the willingness, not only the willingness to participate in maintenance of the scheme, but also the willingness to pay and by themselves agrees to pay extra. Because now it is getting critical that the cattle don't trample the canals, because now that water is valuable and we want it. So I think a lot more needs to be done, but I think what TISA have shown is that if you make it obvious that it is now profitable to irrigate, then the focus on paying for maintenance and contribute is also increasing. I know in Tanzania, they have also set land aside to build an office. We took farmers to other irrigation districts and they learned, and we came back, revised the constitution, and also increased the fee they pay for water. So I think once you get the ball rolling, there is a willingness among irrigators to increase their both monetary and labor contribution.
I don't see any further questions or comments, and we are at time. I'd just like to wind up by firstly acknowledging ACR for their funding over the past 10 years for this transforming irrigation in Southern Africa work. Acknowledge Richard Sturzaker and CSIRO for the critical contributions in developing the tools and the knowledge coming from the VIA Farm project. Just acknowledge again the Crawford Fund that has provided crucial research travel support for a number of the research scholars who've expanded the impact of the TISA project. I thank our African colleagues who've travelled so far to engage with us here in Australia and share your knowledge and findings. And thank you all for participating for what's been a really wonderful and lively debate. Thank you.